This podcast is brought to you by Trivelo Coaching, where we help triathletes and cyclists like you train smarter to race faster. I'm your host, Jordan Donnelly, and on my left is former Australian Ironman Champion and head coach of Trivelo Coaching, Gerard Donnelly. Welcome to another episode of the Get Fast podcast. In today's episode, we are joined by ex-Olympic athlete from the 1996 Atlanta Games and dual ex-5,000 metre Australian champion and 10,000 metre champion, Julian Paynter. Jules, this is the second time on the podcast. Welcome back.
Yeah, I feel pretty privileged there, Jordy, to get called back. I must have done something right the first time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're really looking forward to today's chat because we're going to be chatting all about week 2 of the Olympics, and that was mostly dominated by the athletics, or at least in our eyes, it was dominated by the athletics. I couldn't have watched any more Olympics if I tried, and I know, Dad, you were the same, so we're all raring to get into this conversation. Dad, welcome to the episode.
Thanks, Jordan. I think there'll be a few swimmers out there who'll be a little bit aggrieved at what you just said. I think the swimmers did a reasonable job with their success. So, yeah, look, it's all things Olympics, and that's going to be great to talk to someone who's been there and done that themselves. Jules, good to have you on board, mate.
No, it's good. And a bit of an in-joke is always that the swimming and all that's still part of the opening ceremony, and the Olympics only actually starts when track and field commences.
I agree with that. And, yeah, we are going to focus on week 2 in this episode. Dad, we gave the swimmers their time to shine in the last episode, so we get enough about them. All right. And I just want to start by talking about the Olympics as a whole and how special the event is. And Jules, I want to get your thoughts on this because on the last day yesterday, Channel 7 did a bit of a montage, and of course it was very well put together, very well edited. They had some emotional music showing all the highlights and the lowlights of the Olympics because it's made up of both ends of the spectrum, and it was quite emotional. And it got to the point where they got to Andrew Gaze, who was speaking about the Boomers bronze medal, and he couldn't hold back his emotion when speaking about it. And I'm sure we'll touch on that in this episode as well. But when he was speaking, it really hit me how special the event was and how much it just brings communities together, no matter what sport it is. The whole world kind of comes together. And sometimes there can be a rhetoric around the world that, sport is trivial and, it's just sport. What does it matter? Whereas what does it matter in the grand scheme of real world issues, politics or business or the economy? And I think the opposite. I think sport is something that really brings communities together, really brings families together, countries together, and it creates this once in a 4-year unique event, which is the Olympics, which literally brings together the most amount of cultures in the world to compete, to get to know each other. And Jules, I know in your experience to meet each other in the Olympic Village. So from that perspective, I just think there is something so magical about the Olympics, and that was really highlighted when you really look at the last 2 weeks. It's just such an amazing event to watch for 2 weeks straight.
Yeah, it's such a concentration, Jordy. I mean, the world coming together for a 2-week period across so many different sports. And I think it didn't matter what sport it was. If an Aussie was in it and they were giving it a red-hot crack, we were glued to the television. And that's all we expect to see. And I think that's the real spirit of the Aussies when they're there and they're competing. They're just giving it a red hot crack, and that's what everyone wants to see. I think the world coming together in such a time, especially this one, is quite special. I know, I'm sure if you went back and asked everyone that voted in Japan about not having the Olympics, I'd probably say most of them probably have changed their mind. Not to sort of discredit, why they voted the way they were sort of indicating not to have them on, but I think the crowds that were on the road when the marathon was on indicated public support and just how special the Olympics were and how privileged the Japanese were to hold it. Maybe not in the way they wanted to, but I think, kudos to them to put it on. There was no major dramas in terms of the protocols. It would have been very difficult for the athletes and all the teams to get there. But at the end of the day, there were some amazing results over the 2-week period.
Absolutely agree. So let's dive straight into some of the athletics, and we can talk about any other sports we feel like, but we're going to focus mainly on the athletics, which all three of us just love. And honestly, sometimes I feel a bit like Bruce when I'm watching the athletics, giddy with excitement. He can't contain himself in some of the events, and I'm sitting there and my housemates are going, "Oh, what about this person?" And I say, "Well, they did this at this event. They had this result, and they're expected to get this in this finish." And it's so good. So, I mean, I want to start with, honestly, I think my favorite performance of the Olympics, and it wasn't actually a medal, but I I had goosebumps watching this performance, and I was so amped up. It was a late night performance. I think it was at 10 o'clock. I was so amped up. I couldn't sleep for a couple of hours. I had so much adrenaline, and that was Peter Bowles' 800 final. Yeah. And watching his preparation, I think I watched every single one of his lead up races, and he's always so grounded in all his interviews in the lead up races. He was very much just of the attitude that he wants to keep staying consistent, slowly get better. You know, his attitude was, he was a 145 runner, and he wants to be a consistent 144 runner, and then get up to that level where the guy's running 143 around the world, and just measured in his approach. And that just came through in the Olympic Games so much. And for him to make that final and run as gutsy as he did, and I think the whole country got around him, that for me was just such a special performance.
It was. I think, everyone got to learn a lot about Peter Bowl. The story of Peter Bowl to get to the Olympics is an amazing story. Not only the Olympics, just for his life. The opportunities he's been given coming to Australia. It's sort of quite documented. Him and I think it's Patrick Dean. I think the other 800 metre runner. They were looking for accommodation, couldn't find it, and Bill Shorten stepped in and helped them out. In terms of support for them in the Maribyrnong area. So I think there's lots of stories like that, the support, the amount of people that you saw on television that were, watching Peter Bowl run his 800 metre final, that whole family, it was almost like an entire village that squeezed into a room to watch. But I think it's also the way he ran it. They sort of knew a plan that if it was going to be slow and he was on the front, so be it. And he took it on. He led them and led that Olympic final. So he wasn't there making up the numbers, and he left it all out on the track. And he was looking over his shoulder, and I was so glad he didn't get swamped, and he still got fourth, and he held him off. But he was leading that 800 metre final, and there's not been an 800 metre finalist for 43 years, and that's not because we didn't have good runners, but that's just how cut and throat it is. And I often think, what would swimming be like if there was no lanes? You know what I mean? Like if somebody gets chopped or somebody gets kicked in the face or something like in a swimming race. I mean, that's what happens in running, where it's not a time trial. You can be in a good position and you just get a bump, or somebody out of no fault of your own, somebody falls in front of you, and then that's all of a sudden you're out. So there's a bit of luck that goes through it, but I think Peter Bowl in the final, he made his own luck, and it was a superb performance.
We talk a lot in our podcasts about execution and being a racer, and this is a championship event, and things change from qualifying to championship races, where to get the qualifying time you actually have to run with good execution to get to the time that's required to get into the Olympics, and then you have to absolutely change your whole race plan around. It's a championship race, and anything can happen. And I love the way the Australian athletes took on. You just look across, whether it was the girls in the 1500, him and the two guys in the 800, both of them in the 800, both in the 1500, the 5K guys, who was it who was struggling up the last straight? Pat Tien, and that was Jordan. You mentioned your favourite. I just thought that epitomised the Aussie spirit of. I don't know if anybody saw, but he also fell over in the back straight before he got to the front straight. So he'd already fallen over once, and he fell over in the front straight, and he pretty much got back up and walked across the finish line and set a PB. That's how far he'd gone into the dark zone, and he was 9,600 metres into a race with the best in the world. And you can't, people think, oh, he didn't finish very strong, but he gave himself every opportunity, gave it a crack. That's what came across to me. This is the first time, I always feel like we're making the numbers up in athletics, but this, to me, we have a new breed of athlete who is almost saying, stuff you, I'm good enough to be at the front, setting the pace, or not being knocked over. I loved it. It was the best athletics I've watched in, since I saw Ralph DeBell win in 1968 at Mexico as a 9-year-old. And, I'll never forget that. That was incredible. And it's never, we've never had a runner like it, success like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Did you have any more comments on that, Jules? Or?
No, I think that was. I mean, we'll run through a number of the events, but I think that's what shone through. The vast majority of the athletic team or track and field team, they all competed at a either best or close to their best performances. And it's such a competitive sport. I think if you compare the number of nations that win medals and that compete in athletics compared to other sports at the Olympics, it's a totally different ballgame. So just the width and breadth of the number of countries that compete, it's immense. So there's not too many other sports at the Olympics where you've got multiple African nations all lining up against you. So and that just brings in a whole aspect that's not there in a lot of other sports.
That is such a good point, and that just highlights how good Peter Bowl, 4th in the world, just unbelievable. So I mean that was my favorite moment. Jules, what was your favorite moment in the athletics? It could have been that.
I think we've already touched on it. I think Patrick Tiernan finishing that 10K. I mean, I was pumped for him. Going into the Bell Lap, I thought he might have been finishing in top 10. I mean, they were on a fast pace. And that was the thing at the Olympics. It was very fast. There wasn't that many, like what we call championship races where it was, slow and then a kick home. Most of the races were pretty quick. And I mean, he's running against guys that have run 26:11. They're just out of this world how fast they're going. So, but he was right there. With a lap to go, there's 10 or 11 of them there. There's only one other American, and the rest are all African. And so he's the big white man in amongst them all, and he was there. And then pretty much the wheels fell off in that last sort of 250 metres. And you sort of saw that images of him collapsing and getting across the line, and he absolutely gave it everything. And I think that set the tone for everyone else in the athletic team. To see that performance is like, well, what are you willing to do? And I sort of certainly felt that came out across a lot of performances.
Did you have another special moment that stood out to you?
Yeah, look, I suppose we did talk about it, I think, already, and I loved. Is it Jess Fox, the paddler? And it's not in athletics, but it still stood out to me. 3 Olympics, you've bronzed and silvered. You've never won gold. You're lining up for your 3rd Olympics. You are the last starter on the start line. The camera's looking at you. Everybody's finished. You've got to now try and beat the whole field. You're expected to win, but how much pressure would have been on her? And she executed the best race of her career to win that gold medal, and it had taken her since 2012 to get to that point. So to me, that epitomised the ability of someone to stay true to the plan and to remain focused. And the pressure would have been incredible, Jules. You've been at the Olympics. You know what it's like to stand there on the start line, and imagine what faced her, the failures she'd had, and they're not failures. That she wants to win the gold medal, and she's won bronze and silver, but they're not failures. But her epitome of what she was trying to achieve, she hadn't got there yet. I just think that was really outstanding.
Yeah, I think the key there, and I think some mindset, I can't remember who it was, there was an interview during the Olympics, but is if somebody else is better, so be it. But if I do my best, the result will be what it is. And, so not being afraid, so not thinking about making mistakes, just concentrate on doing the best you can. And if it comes out you're 2nd, 3rd, 4th, whatever, but as long as you know that you've done your absolute best and you've left nothing behind. I mean, she was pretty frustrated. I think it was in the canoe final. I think that's the one that she sort of missed or got a bronze. And then in the kayak, she was one of the people that really fought for that event to get into the Olympics.
Yes.
It was the first time it was in the Olympics. It's been in the men's program for a number of Olympiads, but she's fought for it to get in, and then she's world champion, and she's come down and delivered. So
that is such a good point, and that is so important for athletes to hear. If you're ever nervous about a race coming up, then exactly what you're saying, Jules. Take the result out of it, take the stake out of it, and just focus back on your execution. And if that's good enough, so be it. I just think that is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, if you become too results focused, it can be detrimental. I find. I mean, that's something that I sort of take in.
Absolutely. So let's move through the distances kind of chronologically. So let's go to the 1500 next. What were your thoughts across both the men's and women's the 1500? Because it was unbelievable to have 4 Aussies across the men's and women's final, 2 in each final. Like Dad said before, it's so good to see Aussies on the forefront and not just making up the numbers.
Yeah, I was probably my only disappointment was Jai Edwards didn't get through the heats in the 1500. And I think he was probably more set up to be a championship runner with a faster finish. He's got a faster finish than I think Ollie Hoare or Stewie McSwain, but he just got caught up in a bit of rough and tumble in his heat, missed qualification, so he was out. Really admired Ollie Hoare and Stewie in their semi-finals. I mean, Stewie he took it on. I mean, he just laid it all down. He was going to make sure he knew what the previous semi-final had run. He knew what he had to run. And at worst, if he finished 7th, he would have made it through to the final. So he just laid it all down. So I think that takes big kahunas to, 300 metres to go to be sort of absolutely going full stink and with the threat that you're not going to make the Olympic final. And he was probably one of the people most spoken about in the lead-up. And then in the final, the men's, I think it was just an exceptionally fast race. Ingebrigtsen always looked pretty in control. I think the pace for Stewie was pretty hot, but it probably because it wasn't as fast quick early. So then it became a bit of a push, and he sort of hung on, and I mean got 5th, I think, in the end. So he a fantastic result, and Ollie Hoare. Another great result as well. So for them to both make the finals, pretty special. The women, I think, Lyndon and Jess Hull, they both, competed exceptional to make it through to the final, and they weren't just making up numbers. They weren't trailing off and finishing 80 metres behind. They were right there. I mean, they ran a national record in the qualifying to make the final. So, so Jess beat Lyndon Hall's, runs 3:58. I mean, that's amazing. Even the men, I mean, they were fast. I think Stewie ran 3:31 to get into the final, and I don't think any of them ran over 3:34 until the final, which sort of was a little bit slower early, but then came home fast. So I think really exciting for all of those. And I think in men's 15, there's still another handful of guys out there that are running pretty quick as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next sort of 3 years.
It will be interesting too, Jules. That's a great point. And that really augurs well with all of the other athletes watching on. They must get inspired by seeing, and, we've been to PB meets in summer here, and I'm amazed at how many young female athletes are taken to the track and 17, 18-year-old boys joining in the PB meets. And when they see success from Aussies in the international field at the highest level, it must inspire them and grow the sport, and that's the thing that I'm loving about the Olympics, and it really gives people. I read something today about Brad McGee, being inspired by what he saw at the 1988 Olympics in 1992, and he ended up winning a gold medal at Sydney. Just because he saw something and he thought, I could do that, and there must be so many young boys and girls out there who see this happening now, and Brisbane coming in 2032 is something aspirational for them, and we have the talent. It's just that it hasn't, and I think the PB meet is exploding around the nation at the moment. Is the way to get people to start improving, because they got the competition. That's what we've lacked for so many years.
Oh, I think that's true. I think it's not only, you can have all these athletes, but I think it's getting them to compete. And I think that's what Stewie McSwain does. He leads by example. He competes a lot. I know that's the philosophy that Nick Badeau has, and that goes way back to Kathy Freeman. I mean, she would do multiple events at A grade as part of her training. And, Stewie was running down in Tassie. They run in the pro meets. They do a lot of running and competing and use that racing. It mightn't be at the same level, but it's a bit like our hard hit outs. They use it as training, as a bit of a threshold session.
I asked Jordy Williams, who we've had on the podcast before, who's trains with Stewie McSwain and under coach Nick Badeau. I asked him what he thought of the final and how he thought Stewie went. because he spends, a lot of hours with him each week. And he just said that, because it was so fast, the race did suit him in the final, but he probably just ran out of legs because he'd had to run so hard in the semi. And that was his choice, to run as hard as he possibly could to guarantee himself a spot in the final. But it probably cost him a little bit. Just when the pace really kicked up, he couldn't go with them in that final.
Yeah, I think that's where I think Stewie he's running bloody fast, way faster than I ran. But I'd be my prediction right here, right now, is he'll win a medal in the 5K in Paris. So I think he probably avoided the 5K in Tokyo. I'm only assuming this. I've not heard anything, but I just think the heat would have been, assuming the heat would have been too much of an impact for it, run the 15s and get through. But I think he'll win a medal in the 5K in Paris.
Moving up the chain, we'll talk about the 5,000. That's one of your pet events. And again, both men's and women's were great races. And in the 5K, Cheptegei just too strong.
Yeah, he was. He's come stepped down from the 10 and still was too good. You got Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, Morocco, Qatar. And then there's a heap of other Africans that are running for, Belgium, Netherlands. They're everywhere. So I think he ran really well, ran really strong, and again, a pretty quick time. So
I personally, I was rooting for Katia just because I'd watched a lot of him in the Diamond League meetups, and I really liked the way he races. But he was absolutely nowhere, and it was his I think it was one of his first full years on the international circuit, so maybe just that lack of experience. But we did see the heat have a big impact in both the 5K and 10K. But I wanted to touch on the American Chip Limo, because Dad, you and I watched him in the American Championships, and you might have as well, Jules, where he was running really dirty, and in the last 100 of the kick, where it was a sprint finish, he ended up in lane 4 because he kept pushing out the other athletes. And I hate it when runners do that, where they just go wider and wider. It's like they're not confident enough that they're going to beat them in a sprint, so they push them wider. And he did pretty much a similar thing in the Olympics, and I don't know why it doesn't get caught up more. I just thought his last lap was dirty. It left a real bad taste in my mouth for him getting bronze.
Yeah, I think, they'll do whatever it takes. That's sort of, he's not chopping anyone off. He's just pushing people wide. And if you sort of know he's going to do that, you've got to try and be in front of him before you come off the last bend.
Yeah.
He's not stepping on anyone's heels or anything like that. But I'd sort of say if he's chopping other people, that would be more of a concern.
Well, it works because he's been successful at the last 2 Olympics.
Yeah.
He's got 2 medals, a gold and a bronze. So.
Yeah.
In the women's front, we had Hassan, who was attempting the 1500, 5K, and 10K triple. Yeah. And we didn't touch on it in the 1500, but you said before the podcast, she fell in her heat and then had to do a 400-meter PB, it looked like, to catch back up, and she qualified for the final, which was, when I saw her kick like that, I thought she can't lose anything with a kick like that. But I think, go on.
I think, it was a pretty remarkable day where, she fell with a bit under a lap to go, and then she's had to run, I don't know what a split was, it was certainly sub 60. And in that heat as well, it's quite a hot day from memory that morning. And she, did it pretty easy, but that takes it out of you. And then you've got to run a 5K that night. But she made it look pretty easy in the 5K final.
Yeah, she was just too strong in the 10K as well. Her last 100 meter looked like a sprint.
Yeah, it was. She got shown up by the Kenyan in the women's 15 final, but it was a tremendous result, a tremendous program for her.
2 gold medals and a silver. It's nothing to be.
No, especially in those events.
Yeah,
it was a standout performance, wasn't it? Really.
Yep.
One of the next ones I want to touch on, which was a standout for me, and if it wasn't for Peter Boll, I would say this had the most significant impact on me watching this event, was actually both the men's and women's 400-meter hurdles. Again, I just happened to be watching a lot of the 400-meter hurdle races leading up to the games, and watched Sydney McLaughlin break the world record at the American Olympic qualifications, and watched the Norwegian Viking. I can't remember his first name. Karsten Warholm, is it?
Warholm.
Warholm, yeah. Break the world record in Norway in the Diamond League leading up. And these two races were just exceptional. And I had a similar reaction to Tamsin Lewis in the commentary when it happened. She kind of screamed into the microphone because she couldn't believe what she just saw. And I was similar. It was just such a freakish kind of Superman kind of performance. And both those races with the top two in each race really battling it out just stood out for me as one of the highlights of the Olympics.
No, they were great races. I think that real head-to-head really made it. I think their times in the men's and women's, their winning times would have got them through the first round heats in the 400 metres. So take the hurdles out of it. They're still running fast enough to quite get through the heats to semi-finals in the 400.
44.94 he ran in the final, and
45.94.
Yeah, sorry, 45. So there were, guys struggling to do that in the flat race.
Yeah. And I think, even the guy that came second, I think he ran, 46.15 or something, which was, they're leaving guys like Edward Moses, who was a phenomenal athlete. He's like 20 metres behind him. So I think that, and, the women as well, I think that head-to-head competition in that final really pushed
three of them.
I think it was the kind of conditions where it's nice and hot there. It's good for hurdling and good for sprinting.
Yeah, in both the men's and women's, the first, second has been a battle consistently. And in the women's, there was a third runner as well who hadn't been beaten in a year or something, or 2 years. And in the men's, all three broke the world record. Imagine breaking the world record and coming third. What else do I have to do? And I guess you can't complain. Like exactly what you said before, Jules. It's like, well, that was my best effort. I broke the world record. I can't be unhappy with third.
No, that's right. I think if you've laid it all down and you walk off the track, you would have liked gold, but if you know that you've done the absolute best and you've run a PB, then you've got to be pretty happy with yourself.
And on that note, we are seeing a lot of fast times being run, and this topic got brought up in a Travello group of ours a couple of weeks ago, where looking at shoe technology, it is having an impact on race performances, and you're a big believer that it is impacting a lot of the faster times at the moment. Explain to us some of your thoughts on that, because I hear that and I go, well, I think it's great because we have seen a bit of stagnation in, world records and results maybe for the last decade or two. And then now to see some times being broken, and even if it is due to more shoe technology, at least maybe it gives us some confidence that it's not because of doping,
Yeah, I think, as long as it's an even playing field. I think if it's, within the parameters and they're legal, I don't have a problem with it. You see the track and the conditions that the athletes are running on, it's a bit different to when they last ran at Tokyo, in terms of, a Cinder's track or anything like that. So, that technology, the technology in shoes, even before this last round of this sort of carbon plated shoes, it makes a big difference. So I think that's fine if they're all able to use it. And I think, but the other thing that if you notice, and talking amongst a group of friends while the Olympics were on, was certainly seeing a lot more lower leg injuries. So you sort of saw a number of athletes that had taping on their lower legs. In terms of Genevieve Gregson did her Achilles. Just how many people are getting more lower leg injuries because of the shoes? Some of them, the stability is not as good. So it will just be interesting over time, with more time, to sort of see what the impacts are.
Have you tried the shoes at all, Jules? Have you?
No. It's funny. A friend of mine went for a run, and I think his wife had bought him a pair, and he clipped along in a nice pace. And I made a comment on Strava, and he sort of came back and goes, "Mate, what we would have run if we had these shoes." So it's pretty amazing. But in terms of, they certainly look, especially the longer distance shoes. But you're seeing a lot more people running 5 and 10K, and they're running in runners. They're not running in spikes.
Yeah. Well, I tried my first pair end of last year, and I cannot believe the difference it makes. And it feels like you're being sprung forward, and I can understand why some lower leg injuries might happen, because it feels a little bit unnatural. And so I've tried to really just keep it for races or tough training sessions that I want to do it in, but I'm really trying not to do too many Ks in them, because I do have a little bit of that fear, because it's quite unnatural how much it propels you forward.
Yeah, and the thing is I think I did the calculation for somebody to sort of say, okay, if it improves your time by 1%, that's 12 seconds in a 5K. That's a
significant.
That's a significant amount, and 1% in 1,500. So that's 15 meters. And, that's the difference between making a final and not. But if everyone's wearing them, then that's fine, and there'll be particular runners with particular foot strike, and that might get a little bit more out of them. But I don't have too much of a problem if everyone's doing it. And also it's the same in sort of implements and things like that with world records and stuff like the javelin, where they change the midpoint weight of it, and it brings it back to sort of pull the distance that they're throwing back, just the same as the technology of the shoes will make people run faster. And so long as it gets to a certain limit, and you've not got full-on springs on the bottom there, you're pretty right.
And they have got those limits in because the shoes that Kipchoge ran to break 2 hours for the marathon in that illegal attempt, in quotation marks, it was not counted as a proper world record. It was just to see if a human could actually do it. They are illegal in competition. So there's a few steps of the Nike kind of vapor flies, and the very top ones are illegal in competition, and some of the levels below are legal. But then you're right, it is becoming more of an even playing field because Asics have brought out their own version of a similar shoe, and more shoe companies are getting involved. And I guess one of the arguments against it is that you want to compare, error to error, but it's just impossible because there's so many advances in technology in all areas. So
I think technology, but I think also just the science behind what gets an athlete onto the field. The difference in nutrition, the difference in recovery, the difference in the surfaces they're running on. There's a whole heap of additional elements that go into it nowadays that just wasn't there in the past. So.
The ability to be paid well as a professional athlete and just focus on training is probably a big one.
That always makes a bit of a thing. But, that's the thing. A lot of the athletes that you sort of see at the Olympics, some are definitely professionals and making a lot of money, but there's a lot of athletes that aren't.
Liam Adams is the classic, isn't it? The electrician. Yeah. And, let's talk about the marathon. It's the event, isn't it? I mean, the Olympics, the marathon epitomizes the Olympics, and to see Kipchoge, do the double 4 years, 5 years apart, or as Jules and I were talking earlier, putting them to the sword at exactly the same time, 2 Olympics in a row. It was fantastic to watch.
I think, with Kipchoge, he's the GOAT. Like he is in terms of the marathon. His performances are exceptional at championship level, and let alone how fast he's run. But even if he stopped his running career before he became a marathoner, he had an exceptional 5K. So he's been a medalist at World Championships. He was running against Gabra Selassie and El Garouge. So he's a guy that's done that, and he's moved up into the marathon. And he runs 2:08:38 in that heat as well, and just clipping along at sort of low 15s, then you sort of see the pace just pick up to about a 15:07, and then bang, there's a 14:28. And there, we were looking at the splits going, is that right? 14:28? It looked like he was moving, and his cadence, and he just looked comfortable, which is amazing because you can't appreciate how hot and humid that was. We had a friend on course, and he was giving us the updates in terms of the weather, but then also we're looking at the splits, and you're seeing guys like Gallum Rupp that was right there, and then all of a sudden he's off and dropping back, and it just became, and he finished 8th. So there's people in the top 10 that were pretty much outside that top sort of 4 runners. A lot of them it was survival to get to the line, and there's a long list of did not finish, and you saw runners just running along, and all of a sudden almost going into a headspin and just pulling out.
And there's a lot to be said for execution on those days and understanding the conditions and understanding your ability. And I really thought Liam Adams ran a very, very well executed race. At one stage with, I think, 12K to go, he was 60-something, and he finished 24th or 25th. And I thought that was outstanding.
Yeah, I mean, he still ran 2:15 in that sort of weather condition. So that's quite exceptional.
It really does epitomise the Olympics, I think, as it's such an old school event, the marathon, and to see the carnage crossing the line, just summarise what you're saying, Jules, if the conditions were just that brutal that the athletes were just sprawled out all over the place and really just crawling over the line. They were flying in, they weren't coming in slow.
Yeah, and that's the nature of the Olympic marathon. If, go back, and Barcelona was hot, Certainly Atlanta was hot. Sydney was one of the ones where it was probably a cooler condition, but I think they certainly ran faster here than they did in Sydney. Athens was hot. Beijing was hot. London was okay, and Rio was hot. So you sort of got a lot of really hot, conditions for running an Olympic marathon.
It was interesting watching the battle for the silver and bronze, the three guys battling for 2 medals. And I was astounded to see the guy cheering his countryman and he was representing a different country against the Kenyan. What's your take on that? That was hilarious, I thought.
Yeah, I think just different training partners. I mean, they obviously trained together and they were pretty keen to sort of get across the line just as, supporting one another, let alone that one was running, I think, for Belgium, one was for Holland. So I think that was a great result for them. And I don't think there was too much love lost with Chirono, who they beat across the line.
Yeah, it was a pretty bizarre kind of last 100 meters. And I sort of expected a 5,000 or 10,000 meter style kick where they really just went, but you knew they were on their limit when the pace barely increased. The sprint finish was just the slightest of increases in pace, and you forget that how gone their legs must be. That there's just no way they're going to be able to push any more than that at the end.
Yeah, and they had Chirono on the front there for the last couple of kilometres as well, so they made him work for it and just and rolled over him.
Yeah. Taking it back to the track, I want to touch on a couple more Aussies, and one is in the high jump, Nicola McDermott with the silver medal, a very well-deserved silver medal. Performance was excellent, but I want to hone in on something I think you'll love, Dad, which is a pre-jump routine, same routine every time, gets her in the mode to do that jump, but then more importantly, everyone knows about her post-routine, which is assessing your performance and writing in the diary. And you just put so much emphasis on that, is that you have to assess every result, good or bad, to see what you can learn from.
Yeah, I think what I'd ask anyone is grab a tape measure and measure out 2 meters too.
Yeah.
And that's what we were doing the other night with the boys. We were sitting here watching the television and the long jump qualifications were on, and we grabbed out the tape measure and I just measured out 8 meters and just measure that out. And you go, how does somebody to measure that? And then literally then the men's high jump was on. We put up 2 meters 30 on the wall, but even 2 meters too.
Yeah.
You see, they've got to get over that. It's not just it's not like a basketball ring. You just jump up and touch. It's actually you got to get your whole body over it and not knock off the bar. So quite exceptional. It's fantastic that we've got a couple of really top class high jumpers. Eleanor Patterson, a good Gippsland girl. So she was in the final as well, and it was a great result. And I think again, following a routine, not getting flustered, and you could tell that she was extremely happy in terms of her own performance. Wasn't worried about what the Russian was doing or anything. Just concentrate on what I do, because it doesn't matter what the Russian does, it's not going to impact what I do. So.
Yeah, there's so many good positive things about that. And watching all the field events, it is very much a mind game because there's so much time between your execution of your actual turn. So as a discus thrower, as a javelin thrower, as a shot putter, as a high jumper, there's so much think time between. And if you let the emotion take you on a bad journey, you could underperform. And I was so wrapped away. All the Aussie field athletes performed, and they seemed to be really in a good headspace. And especially the javelin, I don't remember her name, but we had three finalists in the javelin. And
Kelsey Barber, is that her name?
Yep.
She's the world champion.
I think the girl Little from Sydney that
yes,
pretty much come out of lockdown.
Yeah, and like she got herself a medal with her last throw. That takes guts and a really good mindset and concentrating in the moment and executing your best effort and getting everything out of your mind. And we saw that time and time again. And it's different to a track race where the gun goes and it's confusion the whole time, and the person who can hold their head can manage their way and navigate their way to a good outcome. Whereas there's so much time. The high jump takes 2.5, 3 hours of doing your jump and then waiting.
Yeah, and it's not a consistent weight either, because obviously you might clear a height first attempt, and there's a whole raft of people that take multiple attempts to clear their height. So where in the long jump, it's a little bit more consistent, but the high jump, pole vault, you can be out there for a hell of a long time between efforts.
This is why I love athletics, and I do love both track and field, although I lean more to track. But I loved my housemates' reaction to the whole athletics event, because obviously I was watching every event, and they would come in and watch as many as they could, and every event just seemed unique to them. And every time there was a new event on, they'd say, "Is this the weirdest event in track and field?" Because there are definitely some weird events. The high jump itself is just, who thought of that? Who thought of the Frosby flop, or of that way to get over? And then you see the pole vault, and you go, "This is an extreme event." And then even the triple jump, it's just such a weird motion, and the tactics involved in all the track events. And with all those events combined, I know, Jules, that you wanted to talk about Ash Maloney's bronze, the duathlon.
The decathlon.
Decathlon.
Did 10 events, not
decathlon. 2. Yeah, my bad. Decathlon.
I've had one prediction about Stewie McSwain winning a medal in the 5,000 when we get to Paris. I'm tipping a gold medal for Ash Maloney. Like, if he is in one piece and keeps progressing, you've got a 21-year-old and it takes a huge amount of strength, and you look at the physique of the guy that won Warner from Canada, and you look at Ash Maloney, and he still looks a bit of a boy. He's 21, but what an athlete. He runs 10.34 for the 100. Jumps 7 meters 64 for the long jump. Jumps 2 meters 11 in the high jump. And then I think throwing, I think there's a discus there on the first day as well, but then runs 46.2 for 400 the first day.
And can hurdle.
It's absurd.
14-second hurdle nearly breaks 14 seconds for 110 hurdles. Pole vault's 5 meters, and then you see him run the 1500. And it always looks funny when you see decathletes run on, but he still ran 4:38, so he's running just over 3 minute kilometre pace.
Yeah.
And then his teammate Cedric Dubler, he's screaming in his ears to sort of pick up the pace, and he comes home in the last 200 and closes the gap enough and doesn't lose enough points to lose the bronze. So, a fantastic result. What he's done at 21 years of age in the decathlon is really exciting, and it's a brutal sport. Like, doing one event, but let alone 10 in 2 days. And talk about mindset. You got 2 full days where they're out there. So it's a tremendous effort.
Yeah, look, the athlete who can not lose the plot is probably the one who, you've got to be talented, obviously, in all disciplines, but his calmness at 21, and I think he performed a lot of PBs along that journey to get to that, which you just got to take your hat off to say, chapeau, well done, unbelievable.
Yeah. I think a big advantage was having his teammate out there who they trained together with. So it's like, imagine, you've got one of your best friends, training partners, one of the guys that you've sort of really idolised, there with you, and you're working together as a team. So as much as they're all competing against one another, but they're just trying to post the best personal scores.
And you're spot on. The nature of them being that good across so many events is just, it's really hard to comprehend, because they're not just pretty good at them all. They're really at an elite standard, almost an Olympic standard for all these events. I mean, the guy that won, his 100-meter sprint was 10.14 or something. It was as fast as all the 100-meter sprinters in the actual Olympics. And I'm glad you corrected me on the duathlon, because even in my notes, I wrote duathlon. I've just got duathlons on my mind because we've got a few coming up, but it's definitely the decathlon and not the duathlon. But I mean, to finish off with, there are so many highs associated with the Olympics. We see so many good stories, and there are equally just as many devastating stories. And we had a few in the athletics, and we did want to talk about them because they're important to talk about, because it's a natural process that any athlete will go through, whether it be injury, just a devastating performance, under preparation. Something can happen that will leave you in tears compared to elation.
Yeah, and I think that's it. I think, whether or not it's anything to do with the footwear or anything like that, but Genevieve Gregson rupturing her Achilles in the steeple, heartbreaking. I think the low, as much as we sort of said it was gritty, but I'm sure Patrick Tiernan didn't sort of think he'd finish the way he did in that. But out of that, that was a truly gritty performance that will sort of, be in everyone's memory for a long period of time. I think, even in the track cycling, Alex Porter, crashing like that, took real courage to get back on the bike. Catriona Bissett in the 800, was certainly running plenty of sub twos, and then just didn't quite have it, or didn't run the race that she would have liked in the 800 metres. And then probably Jack Rayner in the marathon comes in with a bit of a stress reaction in the leg apparently, and that's the luck or misfortune of it all. You come into the Olympics, fingers crossed that it's going to pan out that way, but he didn't last too long, so which is bitterly disappointing for him as well. So as much as there's all highs, there's a lot of lows as well. The Matildas getting knocked out, or the Opals not progressing, lots of that. So that's the Olympics, is that just how big and special it is. It's once every 4 years. They don't have a chance to redeem themselves next week or next year. It's luckily they've only got 3 years, but it's a 4-year program. So and whether or not luck is on their side, that they're fit enough and well enough to sort of qualify and get into another Olympic games.
And look, that sort of summarises why I think it was so extraordinary what Jess Fox did from 2012 to 16 to 2021. That is exactly what you said. There's so many lows in her journey, and to finish off with the high, that's what a lot of the people listening, it's not going to turn out 100% the first time. If it does, I'll use Jordan as an example. He's played senior football for 2 years. And in those 2 years, he's won 2 premierships. I mean, how many footballers can say that? Guys play 50 years and they don't get a premiership. But that's just, fortune to have that happen. But they're the highs, but the lows, can be years and years of toiling and having, unlucky things happen to you, injury or illness or poor form at the wrong time. It does take a really good set of events for you to actually get to the best outcome on the day that it counts the most. And there's not many people who can do that. And, for every race that's run at the Olympics, there's only one winner. And everybody else in the race has not succeeded in winning the race. So, as you said earlier, I think that's important for us to understand that not only is your personal best one of the main things to aspire to, but also the journey of how you're doing it, how you're getting there, and the things you're learning about yourself and others around you, and come race day or whatever you're working towards. That's not all that counts. It's getting yourself prepared properly and giving yourself the best chance to actually do a PB.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a combination of so many things, Jerry. I think it's a lot of planning, being confident, and also being very lucky. So I think getting there, and there'll be a lot of athletes that will be already circling the dates that they think they're going to be competing on in 2024 and working backwards from there. So there's a lot of work that will be done, but life will go on, and who knows what the world will be like in 2024. But hopefully we can get over there and watch some of it.
One last thing on that note, I'd like to ask you both, as an athlete, when you have these major setbacks or disappointments, how do you personally pick yourself back up and go again?
You go, Jules.
For me, it's all about perspective, Jordy. Like I was hoping that, after making 96, I was in good shape in 99, and I would go to the 2000 Olympics, and injury sort of worked out that it didn't happen. And then pretty much with less than a year after the Olympics, it pretty much reoccurred, and so my running career was over. And it's having perspective that, I don't worry about what I didn't do, I just worry about what I did do. So I was very fortunate and lucky to get to one Olympics, and quite amazing, and put it in perspective that if the worst thing in my life is that I didn't get to go to my second or third Olympics, I'm doing all right. So that's something that sort of sticks with me. Is I know stories of other people, in terms of not just sport but in life in general, that they've got a lot more to deal with than what I have to. So it's always being put things in perspective. And I know I say this to Jerry out on the bike, and you have problems and you got a flat battery or something like that. I go, well, Eddie Merckx didn't have to deal with that. So so we've sort of got to put things in, and what in our house here we always sort of say, is that really a first world problem? if the ice cream's not hard enough or cold enough or
Yeah.
anything like that. But I think it's just putting things in perspective and being real around what it actually is and what you're doing. And I think who was it that I think Mike Powell or somebody like that, back in the day, long jumper, he says, I get paid a lot of money to run and jump into sand. So it's the same. Back in the day, I was very fortunate to, live a life of just going for a run. So I think it's that, just keeping things in perspective, what's really important, and then things that are sort of nice to do.
Perfect answer.
Fantastic. It's a bit hard to follow up on that one, I reckon. But for me, I just think the journey is so much more important. I've said it so many times. I just love the journey, and there's always going to be probably 99% of, you're never achieving the ultimate. And if you only competed because of the high of the victory, then I don't think there wouldn't be a lot of people competing. And I think it's more about the journey and what you learn about yourself. And there's so many lows that, that happen on that journey, and you got to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and refocus. And I'm so determined from my negative results to drive me to it motivates me to aspire to be better. And if I perform poorly, it's almost fuel for me to actually reset and work out, where did I go wrong? What preparation did I do wrong? How did I execute? And it's a driving force to get me up the next morning when I look and think about when the start line is in 6 weeks' time or 6 months' time, and work backwards from there, saying, right, what just happened then is never going to happen again, and I'm going to get myself in the best preparation. And it's a different take on from what you've just said, Jules, but it's more in line with what I feel is the driving force for what we do, what we love to do. And at the end of the day, as long as I've performed to my best ability, then the low, there's no longer a low. It's hard to talk in highs and lows. I just think the journey is a high in itself. And if you can actually execute on race day or whatever you're aspiring to, I just think you're a winner anyway. And that's kind of what gets me motivated day in, day out, I think, because, when you get to, 60 plus, you think, well, you've been doing this since you were 18, or in some cases since you were 12. How do you keep fronting up for another training session? Well, that's easy, because I just compartmentalize everything and work backwards from my next destination point.
Great two answers there. So, on that note, and in line with kind of the Olympic spirit, I want to finish off this conversation by asking you, Jules, what else stood out to you from a takeaway perspective, or what stood out to you in the Olympics that is worth paying attention to or worth learning, do you think?
I think it's what it means to those people that have sort of been there multiple times, or in some instances, we look and go, what does it mean to Paddy Mills? So he's a guy that's been on multiple campaigns, hasn't won a medal, and the work and preparation that goes into it for those guys is immense. A lot of time and sacrifice away from families in a team environment. But you could just see that these games, there was a real focus in the team, and they won all their pool games and came up against America, and that unfortunately came up short. But it would have been nice to be on the other side of the draw and potentially meet America in the final rather than the semi-final. But to see that performance, the team spirit that would have been, there was a massive gathering of the Aussie athletes back in the village watching the game. And that's what it is. It's an Olympic team. So you've got all the different sports come together to cheer on and congratulate everyone. There'll be a lot of people that were pumped about winning BMX because it's all part of their team, part of the Australian team. And then to see the reaction of Joe Ingles, Paddy Mills, with a bronze medal around their neck, they were just over the moon. And I saw footage earlier today of a gathering of all the athletes, and they're singing. We come from a land down under in the village, and Paddy Mills is in the middle of it all, dancing. And and there's all athletes sitting around, and there's NBA stars, Dellavedova and the likes that are, in amongst all the other athletes, and they're just having a good old time. And I think that's the spirit that they sort of get, and you don't get it anywhere else. And I think the other thing was, probably Andrew Gaze's reaction, tearing up, and that's over a bronze medal. They're bloody hard to win, where, maybe not so hard to, certainly hard to win in the pool, but probably not as hard, I would say. So to come away with medals in the pool than, say, basketball or some of the other sports that are on offer.
Yeah, I think Andrew Gaze really epitomised the feeling, didn't he? And listening to his story with for those who don't know, his dad was, Mr. Basketball of Australia, and he started basketball back in the 70s, Lindsay Gaze. And I heard him say that, there was 250 registered basketballers in Australia back in the 60s and 70s, and where basketball has come from there. And, Andrew's lived that as a little kid watching his dad. So, you can really understand why he was so emotional to see, him being in 3 or 4 Olympics himself and come 4th 3 times. And, it's such a journey, and another one of those examples of hanging in there and how sweet it is when it eventually happens. And you have to be patient in all sorts of walks of life. It means more to you when you have to strive harder, I think, to get to the end of the journey. So it was so good to see him so vulnerable and open up. And I loved it. That was one of the highlights for me, to see him. It meant so much to him.
And Jules, taking it back, I mean, how much did you feel the Aussie Spirit competing for your country in 1996?
It was fantastic, Jordy. I think, again, it's you'd be heading off to compete and people didn't even know you, so whether they be a swimmer or whatnot, but they saw you were going to compete and they were wishing you luck. So it wasn't like they didn't know who I was, but and certainly when you came back or you met other athletes, it was very tight. Or the number of track and field athletes that were in the stadium the night that Kathy Freeman was running the 400 in Atlanta. Everyone, there was lots of TV rooms that were pretty full with athletes, watching lots of different sports. So you became a bit of an expert on all the sports. And certainly I know in Atlanta, the rowers were off at a different venue, so about, I think, 50 or 60 kilometres away. But as soon as they finished, they were all back in the village and getting in on the Olympic spirit. But that was one of the things you take away from it. And then also the guys that you competed with and on the track and field team, you sort of still have to this day still a very, very strong bond. And I've got a picture, so where I've got my ergo set up, and these days we do a lot of time on the ergo, but I've only got to look up and it's a picture of as I've walked into the stadium of the opening ceremony, and that's the I always look at it and go, that's the moment I became an Olympian, and it's very special, and it sort of reminds me of all the hard work that I've done, and that reminds me of why I do what I do now.
Truly amazing. I mean, I couldn't think of anything more special than to be able to call yourself an Olympian and represent your country. And like I said at the start, some people might trivialize sport that way, but I totally disagree. I think it brings the nation and the country together. We saw so many examples of that. And I think social media also compounds that effect now. Stewie McSwain said in an interview after that he sees every single message from thousands of randoms, which just gives him so much support and belief. To finish off, Dad, did you have any other comments you want to make about the Olympics in general or comments towards Jules?
No, we're really fortunate to have Jules on board, and his insights is as usual so measured, and that Olympic spirit is definitely strong and epitomises what Jules is about, and it's great to have someone with such intimate knowledge still in the sport, giving us some of his insights. So I really appreciate that, Jules. So thanks very much, mate, for being on board.
Pleasure. And probably, just to round out, I mean, I'd sort of say what we've got in the Trivelo group isn't dissimilar to preparing for the Olympics. The group of athletes feeding off each other's performances, whether or not I've never met Blair down in Tassie, but I certainly have raced enough against him on Zwift, and sort of you feel connected. And certainly, Nick Lacandro and the likes that, are all on the Zwift racing. And then the guys that we train against, during the week when we have our group rides on the Saturday, it's pretty competitive, but you feel like you're competing against a great bunch of mates and you push each other along. And there's a lot of fringe benefits that we get out of that that you don't get anywhere else. And I think that's a real training advantage that we have that other people don't, which keeps you motivated when you're in lockdown. I sort of see lockdown at the moment it's a real advantage for us because we'll feed off each other and our training performances won't fall away.
Yeah. Every time there's a lockdown, I sort of think to myself, well, I know I'm going to have a really good training block. So
yeah, that's it. So,
I love that you said that, because when I watched that Channel 7 montage yesterday that I mentioned at the start of this episode, that was actually one of the first things I thought of was the amazing Trivelo community that has formed through the nature of sport. And it's why we are so passionate about Trivelo coaching and what we do here. It's because the amount of friendships and networks that have been created just in Trivelo alone shows the power of sport and community. And so I think that is just such a brilliant point and a great way to finish off. So Jules, thank you very much for joining us. Absolutely loved having this chat with you. And I think we'll have to make you a bit of a regular. Anytime there's any big athletics events on, we'll get you on and have some special comments.
No problem. Anytime.
Thank you, Jules. Appreciate it. Cheers, Dad. And that's it for this episode. We'll see you next time.